Welcome everybody to Open Book. I'm your host, Johnny Kusnow. I'm delighted to have as my guest Gary Wheeler. We're going to talk about UFOs, a program I've been waiting my whole adult life to do.
This is it.
But I think it'll be a very interesting and fascinating discussion. So, Gary, welcome to the show.
Well, I thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
I once, as a young boy, saw, and this is where I think this piqued my interest. It was I think on Channel 13. I don't know why I'm saying that. WGAN in Portland, and the title of it was UFO: Friend, Foe, or Fantasy. And I remember that. I remember just being just amazed and enthralled at that. But I want to ask you, just starting with a rudimentary, perfunctory term, would you, Gary, just define what a UFO is?
Well, I think kind of the formal definition is just some sort of vehicle that's seen in the sky that cannot be identified as anything known. So it becomes an unidentified flying object. And that became a popular way of referring to, a lot of things that people would see that in reality weren't really what we would call visitation by other beings, but were more the fact that people were seeing things they had never seen before, just because they were unfamiliar with certain aircraft and certain weather things that happen in the sky. So, but and this has been going on for such a long time that I don't think they're even called UFOs anymore. The people kind of in ufology call them IFOs because basically they do know what they are. In many cases, that these are craft that belong to other beings, whether these beings are interplanetary or they're actually transdimensional, or they're both. There's no way for us to know, but that's basically where it's defined right now.
Right, and if it says UFO, just by that very context doesn't necessarily mean it's extraterrestrial. It's just at that point you can't identify it. So
right, but it's become to mean that. It's like the popular nomenclature has made it sort of, when you say UFO, you're implying that it's alien somehow.
Now, I am still sorting out through all of the various reports, sightings. I'm trying to figure out what I actually believe. Now, am I absolutely certain that they exist? No, but do I believe that the possibility is very strongly there? Yeah. So I'm somewhere in that camp where I accept that they very much could exist, but I'm not quite ready to exactly say okay. Is that? Do you find people in that?
Oh, most people are there. I mean, that's where they are. I mean, most people have a belief system now that allows that sort of thing into it, saying it is possible that we are being visited by others, but it's more of a belief than it is a reality. But if you really study the testimonials over time, especially since World War II, and the amount of sightings that have occurred and the amount of professionals that have come forward, airplane pilots, people who are in the services that have all had a variety of experiences with these objects, it's pretty hard not to accept the fact that something quite amazing is going on, and it has been going on probably for a long time.
The United States Air Force Blue Book,
right?
We talked a little bit before the show. Mm-hmm. Clearly, from some of the reports that I've read or researched, there's an issue that if the Air Force, and I know the British government felt this way during World War II, what Churchill did, if you were to come out and say that there are UFOs, it would cause, they say, panic and pandemonium, and clearly that's not going to help. So do you have some fix on how?
Well, I think that was true back then. I mean, the society, our civilization was very different back in those days after the war, and there was a lot of fear back in those times. So, and also, let's face it, the people in power were dealing with a subject that was very foreign to them. And the last thing you want to tell a population is something's going on that you have no control over, and it's evident that these particular beings have tremendous more power than we do, and are much more intelligent. So that's a hard case to tell a population. It still is now. I mean, even though the evidence is overwhelming now that it is going on, the media nor the political structure is not going to come forward yet.
And I'm a pilot. I fly, and I noticed you stated that pilots. Now, pilots are very keen observers.
Right, they are.
And I was interested. I read several reports where many pilots, have seen craft, for lack of a better, and they're doing things aerodynamically, such as making 90-degree turns, accelerating, and so on. So, what does that tell you about the credibility of the?
Well, I think the problem is that, the way we perceive things is based on our five senses, and the way we analyze our reality is by how those five senses give us information. And in reality, it's all basically electromagnetic energy that we're interpreting that's coming in through our senses. And when you look at the electromagnetic scale, we're dealing with a very, very tiny area of this huge, massive scale of energy that's going on. And it's evident that from how these craft behave, that they are not dealing with the same physics we are. That their physics, however it happens, is different. Or that they can literally cancel out our physics as we know it. So they're not reacting to our gravity, and they're certainly not reacting to our air resistance when they go from 0 to 7,000 miles an hour within our atmosphere. They don't even break the sound barrier as far as any noise. So, I mean, something different is going on. And it's a matter of, physics, and we don't understand what that dynamic is on that level. Although quantum physics now is getting closer to accepting the fact, because of looking at reality in such a broader sense now than just what we perceive, it's allowing what they do to come into play and say, well, that's probably possible. We don't know how it works, but it's probably possible.
A la Heisenberg effect,
Right.
and the uncertainty principle,
Right.
which is leads me to just. I'm glad you kind of broke the ice there. Do you feel that the anthropomorphic arrogance of man, and it always galls me when you have these scientists on saying, well, life on other planets needs to be carbon-based, they need water. Well, who says that?
They say it.
Well, they say that, but clearly these people have an arrogance. Why is it that is we're basing everything on what we see here? That's clearly, epistemologically speaking, as you mentioned, our sensorium. What if we don't have? We have nothing to determine electromagnetism. Right. So based on that, I can go a little farther in my own beliefs. I can say, hey, wait a minute.
Right. You're
not taking this into account. I don't buy that. I don't think you need carbon and water to call life. And I'm using quotation marks,
Right.
but I realized no one can see this. But can you just expound on that that concept?
What you're saying is true from the scientific standpoint. Our science has to be, in order to be credible, tries to be definitive. And the reality is you can't make anything really definitive. You can see how much science in the past has been changed over time, and the principles are different than they were 30, 40 years ago about how we analyze things. But science will not embrace the mystery. And when you deal with a subject, you have to embrace the mystery. You have to allow unknowns to occur, because as soon as you want to categorize everything so you can somehow pinpoint it, that you can feel safe by knowing something, you're in trouble, because you're not going to be able to know. So you have to open yourself to the possibility of not knowing exactly what's taking place, but knowing something incredible is going on. But science and the scientists, many of them cannot go there.
Right. And just to play the devil's advocate,
Sure.
because I know people are saying, Johnny, you got to ask him this and that. Right. But in all of the research that I've done, now you can say Roswell, and you can say, I know in England there was a very, the actual burning of the.
In the forest.
But people will always say, Gary, there's no concrete physical evidence that they can take. Is that a question of we're not privy to that evidence, or there isn't actually anything solid that someone can say, here's an alloy that we have never heard of or seen or touched? How do you broach that? How do you measure that?
That's in the broader sense, that's probably true, in the sense that nobody's come on TV and shown something and said this proves their aliens do exist. But there's been a lot of evidence where craft have landed, that they can actually show how the craft has affected the Earth, where it's landed. There's been a lot of recent information on implants that some people carry as a result of being abducted. Those implants have been removed, and they're finding that they're constructed of a type of metal that's very similar to a meteorite, actually, but that they have a certain kind of organic composition as well, which is something that's almost impossible here. So there are things coming out that are foreign, in a sense of saying that this says that something rather odd is happening, and
right.
People are being affected. And of course, there's a lot of people. As you know, I was doing a class here for several weeks on UFOs, and I had several people come up to me and talk to me privately about incidents that occurred to them. And this is what happens in general, is people are very reluctant to talk about it because of the way the media has set up the whole thing, where they make fun of people who talk about it. And some of the people who have had really incredible sightings and have come forward in the media, they've just been beaten up. And
right.
These people have basically said afterwards, I would never, if you see anything, don't tell anybody.
Well, the case in point of these military officers,
oh yeah,
excuse me, if they came forward, and several of them have said, this will ruin my career. So,
well, one of the reasons it's so different now is back in the 40s and 50s and the 60s and onward, since there were so many sightings by military and commercial pilots, that those men at that time, of course, were held to secrecy by the military, but they've all retired. Most of them are dead now, but over the last 20 years, many of them have come forward and said, I don't want to go to my grave without saying what happened. And they come forward. There's been two very strong disclosure appearances by individuals. One took place in 2000 down in the Press Club in Washington. There was maybe 50, 60 witnesses that came forward, all of which were extremely credible. And just recently, this last May, there was a disclosure hearing in Washington, again at the Press Club. This went on for a whole week. And this hearing was basically set up like a congressional hearing. In fact, there were 6 retired congressmen as part of this. And they set it up just like they would set it up in Congress. And people came forward and testified, and questions were asked by the congressmen. And it was an incredible amount of information transpired at that time. Again, the media hardly covered it. There was just little blurbs on the Huffington Post and just a little bit of information, nothing really following what happened. So it's very hard to get this stuff out there in a credible fashion.
Mm-hmm. You're listening to Open Book. I'm your host, Johnny Kusnow. My guest is Gary Wheeler. We're talking about UFOs. I want to thank my sponsor, Timberhead Music. And we are on 93.3 FM in Rockland, 99.3 in Camden. Talk, if you would, Gary, about Project Blue Book, the Air Force's study of all of these. They figured that they had to. The guys was a national security.
Well, yeah,
that's what they said. Yeah. But what do you know? Well, what would you say? How would you categorize the ramifications of that study?
Well, again, basically, it was a government study, and they didn't want to find anything in part because they couldn't really explain. If they found something, they couldn't say really what was going on. And again, when you're dealing with the public, you can't define how the government can protect the public when these vehicles are so superior to us, which indicates so are the beings in them. But the Blue Book was, I think, basically after all the studies that they took, all the information they took, they came up with saying, well, out of all the sightings and information, they had maybe 5% of the sightings could not be explained. But at the end of the study, what they did say is they didn't say UFOs don't exist. They just said that there's no national security threat. And that was it.
Right.
Now, later they had another study that was done in Colorado called the Condon Report. The same result occurred. Condon was somebody who was basically hired because he was a naysayer, and which, interestingly, later on in life, he became a supporter of the whole concept. But in that study as well, it came out with the same final statement. There's a very small percentage that cannot be explained, and therefore, we're just going to say it's not a national security threat. So don't worry about it.
Right. And I know that people will say any number of reasons when you see an identified flying object. It could be aircraft, balloons, noctilucent clouds, hoaxes, St. Elmo's fire, Faxa Morgana, all of those things. But this is where I am in concert with you. I think the numbers, and there are different numbers according to the report, but of all of these, you take tens of thousands of these, there's usually about 1 to 1.5% of these that have absolutely no credible way to disprove them.
Right.
There's nothing that anybody can actually say, okay, this was swamp gas, or this was Venus, or whatever. So clearly, with all of these thousands and tens of thousands of sightings, there's about 1.5%. So what are those?
Well, we don't. I mean, you say there's 1.5%, but I mean, who's explaining what was really going on? I mean, you have all kinds. You read off the various ways that they interpret these different sightings that occur, but there's no really proof. I remember as a kid, I was 10 years old, and it was 1952 when the front page picture on the newspaper was of the Capitol building with 10 flying saucers flying over it. And the headline was "Flying Saucers Over Capitol." And I was 10 years old, and I saw that in the paper, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. And the next day, the paper came out and said, well, that wasn't really flying saucers, that was swamp gas. That's when the whole swamp gas thing happened.
Yes.
And so, I mean, when they say that so many sightings can be written off as this or that, there's no real proof for that either. But, back in World War II, they had a thing they called Foo Fighters. And Foo Fighters were these orbs, these basically kind of white in color orbs that would fly around the planes at very high speeds. And nobody knew what they were. The Americans thought there was some sort of German thing that was kind of spying on the planes, and the Germans thought they were ours. Well, they were neither. They were just somehow, what they think was this was just kind of an observation of what was going on by these other beings. That was one of the ways to do it. In fact, orbs are very commonly seen now by a lot of people, more so than necessarily discs in the sky. And the orbs can appear almost anywhere, and there's a lot of controversy about what they really are, but they are definitely there.
And interesting, I remember this name from way back, but I did some further research. Allen Hynek.
Hynek, yeah.
Now, he's a trained astronomer.
Right.
He was very skeptical. He was an advisor on Blue Book.
Right.
But over the fact that he kind of read these reports, and he said, I quote, he came to the conclusion, many of these could not be, quote, satisfactorily explained. So what does that tell you when you have a trained scientist who was skeptical, and all of a sudden he said, wait a minute, no, there's something here.
Well, later on in life, he actually came forward and said, there is something there, and it's not us, basically. And, these scientists all have, reputations, and they all have, credibility issues, and that keeps them, I think, in many cases, from actually coming forward. But these people that do come forward are very brave in the first place, but there are many of them.
Well, let me just go
Sure.
just one step farther on that. Okay, I can accept that there's something that maybe we can't explain, or we can't get our intellectual mind around. Would there be any issues with there being it's so far away from wherever these crafts are coming from to negotiate the great distances in our galaxy? Is there any sense of how they're doing it, or does that fall into the realm of we don't have the intellectual tools to understand, say, their physics?
Well, I think, the changes now that are occurring in quantum physics as far as a greater understanding of how the possibly different dimensions work, that in those particular dimensions, they wouldn't follow the same rules, including the speed of light. So this whole limitation of the speed of light is kind of no longer valid as far as a lot of scientists feel that we're barking up the wrong tree. That's another one of the dimensional things that we use to define our universe, and it's probably going to be proven not to be the case. But these beings, in speculation, could also be transdimensional. They could be basically function in a fifth or sixth dimension and just move into ours.
String theory.
Well, yeah, and they can move into our dimension and move out of it. Because when many people see these craft, some people can see right through them as though they're not quite formed yet.
Yes.
Often they disappear in a way that you can sort of see them fade out. It's as though they're moving into another kind of space. And it's very evident that their ability to manipulate the electromagnetic scale allows them to basically appear kind of any way they want by messing with the frequency of the waves, because that's how we perceive. So they can basically make us perceive whatever they want by altering these waves.
Yes, and by their very virtue of, this isn't a tautological argument, but by the very virtue that they are here, ergo they have a much higher sophistication of everything.
Right.
And
right.
so there are things that they could be doing
Right.
that we have no knowledge of.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I remember studying Chinese history, and they thought when there was an eclipse that they felt a dragon was going into the sky and swallowed.
Right. Right.
Now clearly that's what they had to work with.
Right.
And we know that that's not true.
Right.
So could we be subsetted, could we be in that little evolved into something like we just don't have the knowledge base to even perceive what is going on here?
Well, true. What we do have, though, is individual experiences. We have testimonials of all kinds of different levels of involvement with these beings. Abduction is a huge issue that was more than commonplace back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was estimated that over 2% of our population was abducted. That's 2% of, 300 million, is 6 million people who were abducted. And there's a lot of people who, some have memories of that, some have partial memories, some have indications that something occurred in their body. Some have been regressed hypnotically to have memories about what did occur. That's a big deal. And there was also very indications of genetic kind of manipulation with using human eggs. And you had the whole thing with the cattle mutilations that have been going on for 30 years, where cattle are basically taken, it appears they're taken, and certain parts of their bodies are taken surgically, which looks like with a laser beam of some sort, and then they're replaced back on Earth again. And that's become a huge mystery. But the mystery is that nobody can explain what's going on.
Yeah. Just to touch back on a little bit of history, ancient history, I had the great pleasure to actually visit Stonehenge on the plains of Salisbury.
Right.
As I walked down that road, and I remembered as a young man, I felt like an electrical, I can't explain it, I tingled.
Well, that's right.
I tingled. And back then, you could literally walk among those monoliths. So it was just absolutely fantastic. The pyramids,
Right.
the plains of Nazca.
Right.
Now, those pyramids are cut. You can't even put a dollar bill
Right.
between them.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
I guess, Gary, my question is how did these ancient civilizations And how did they draw? First of all, in NASCAR, the only way you can see that it's a jaguar
Right.
bird, you'd have to be up about 8,000
Exactly.
feet. So what does your sensibilities tell you about these ancient Eric von Daniken and all that? What do you think?
Oh, well, I definitely prefer myself to look at that as something that's much more real than our own mythology. And, as you're talking about Stonehenge, well, one of the greatest indicators today of the fact that these beings are here and communicating with us is crop circles. All the crop circles that appear in England every year, many of them are just beyond comprehension as far as their complexity. And of course, there's always been controversy of humans are doing it, but the analysis of these crop circles have shown that there's no way that humans are doing it within the space of time that they appear. They appear overnight. The crops are bent over by some sort of microwave heat. The crop is not broken. When people do it or trying to reproduce those effects, all the crop is broken and is dead. So there's today, that's probably the greatest indication that,
Right.
that these beings are there, and also these symbols are extremely complex geometric shapes that definitely appear to have some level of meaning as far as trying to communicate with us on some level.
And don't they, I think this was in England, I may have this wrong, but isn't there a kind of the radiation is somehow
Oh, yeah.
present and there's no way to explain
Right.
it, and somehow the granules of sand are fused because of
Oh,
the
yeah.
heat. So, and that clearly couldn't be...
No, and actually they have videos now of actually balls, these light balls, whipping around the field at night, and you can see the wheat just laying down when these balls pass over at phenomenal speeds. So, I mean, that's a pretty good indication that that isn't something that we're doing, or
Right.
people are going out there and producing those. So, to me, that's a very positive indication in the sense of a reality that we can see today.
Right.
That says something's going on.
And the disbelievers might say, well, Gary, these are just super secret aircraft that our government or governments are working on, and they have the ability. They don't want the Russians to see our technology, so these are actually man-made, super sophisticated aircraft of some type.
Well, there's always that. I mean, there's always a way to say there's some level that human beings are doing it, but I mean, there's since Roswell happened, or there's indication that Roswell happened, there's always been the speculation that some of the reverse engineering that came out of Roswell has actually given our government the ability to create these craft themselves. That there actually is a shadow government that has these kinds of technologies. Now, Philip Corso wrote a book called The Day After Roswell. He was in the Army. He was in a special part of the Army that analyzed foreign intelligence, basically. But he was given the task in his book. After Roswell, several years, he was given several pieces that were collected from the craft. His job was to take these to industry and say, what can you learn from these? And some of them were things that our industry developed so fast after they received these that it's hard to not believe what Corso says. And, some of them, like optic fibers, some of the computer processors kind of things were involved. Night vision was involved. Solar cells that were much more efficient than anything we had were involved. There was a helmet involved that the helmet actually was controlled by thought processes in your mind, which actually our pilots now do in helicopters. They wear these helmets.
Was there a cadaver at Roswell?
Well, they say there was.
that's
yeah.
been speculated.
Oh, yeah. No, it's speculated. There's been several crashes. There's been several cadavers. There's been testimonial at these hearings of men who worked for the military who actually their job was to go retrieve these sites and protect them from any kind of media and to save whatever they could find and save. And there was a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And apparently there was at least 5 or 6 different races of aliens that they say they have come across in these craft.
You're listening to Open Book. I'm your host, Johnny Kusnow. We're talking to Gary Wheeler, and we're discussing UFOs, friend, foe, or fantasy. I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
I'm stealing it, but it's been 40 years.
That must have been one of the first ones.
I think so. In November of 2011, the U.S. government responds to petitions concerning aliens that visited the planet. Quote, "The odds are pretty high there is life on other planets." So the government is under pressure from all of these people, and they're saying there's life on other planet. But is life on other planet linear to UFOs? In other words, can there be a reasonable, and then this goes back to definition of life, but is it reasonable to say there could be life on other planets without them transporting themselves to Earth?
Oh, yeah, I think there's reason to think there's all kinds of life out there. I mean, it was just, 5 years ago that we realized that all these stars that we were looking at actually have planets going around them. And recently they've come out and say, there's some planets that are almost exactly like Earth and are just the right distance from their suns in order to have life. What I think is happening actually is I think the government has known that these aliens exist for a very long time. In fact, there's some indication they've been in communication with them on many levels, but the government knows they can't hide this forever. And I think that all these kinds of things that are coming out now about possible life on other planets, possible communications with, through SETI and things like that with other universes and other beings, they're setting us up so that when they actually comes out that these aliens are amongst us, around us, we won't be so shocked, because that being said now, 20 years ago, you would have never heard of any of that.
Right.
So it's sort of like setting it up so that we will accept the fact, and there won't be panic.
Right. Well, the polls show, most of them, that roughly 70% of Americans believe in some UFO. I mean, they already believe that. I don't know what the sequelae to that is, though. Right. They believe it, and then where do you go with it?
Exactly. I mean, when it actually occurs and they come forward and are basically introduced to the world population, then all hell breaks loose in the sense of psychologically people have to reevaluate their belief systems. I mean, let's face it, the Bible sort of goes out the window, but one of the leaders in these investigations has been the Catholic Church. They were one of the first ones 10 years ago to come out and say, we have no problem with extraterrestrial aliens existing. This does not interfere with our belief system because, God is capable of creating all kinds of things everywhere. So what's the big deal? So they kind of set it up themselves to allow this to occur. So there's a whole broad base of things that are occurring out there that are going to take some of the shock out of it when it becomes known.
I was just thinking as you were responding to that, I was just thinking in my mind, I said, I don't want to get too metaphysical or existential, but that's a whole other conversation. If you want to invoke religion, God, the universe, I mean, so if you step to that plateau, where do you go from there? I mean, do you still have religion? I mean, as a Catholic, as a young altar boy, a Jesuit trained, Copernicus, the universe, Earth is the central in everything in the church. So I'm a little puzzled as the church being open to say, we're not, Galileo, he was a heretic.
Oh, right.
So that's kind of, to me, fairly provocative.
Well, I think it is in a sense, although we're very good at adapting ourselves to new information. We can rationalize almost anything in order to hold on to what we want to believe is true. So I in a lot of ways, I think many things would be challenged. Certainly one thing would be challenged is the federal government. And, because they've hid this for so long, they have to come up with some pretty good answers about what's been going on. And how it will actually occur is hard to say. One can speculate in a lot of different ways what's going to actually happen. Now, there's been several incidences in the past where UFOs have actually turned off our nuclear missiles in Montana and other nuclear missile sites where the UFOs were sighted over the property where these missiles were kept, and the missiles were taken offline, as they say. They couldn't function. And all the missiles went down at the same time, which is impossible. The way that they're wired, they cannot be controlled that way. Each individually is controlled individually. So they were all shut down. This took place at 2 different bases with witnesses seeing the UFOs at the same time. And around the same period of time, this was in the 80s, in Russia, the same thing occurred, except they turned the missiles on as though they were going to fire them, and then they turned them off. Mm-hmm. So to me, this just indicates they're saying, look, we're not going to interfere with your growth and how you deal with each other, but this is off the line. You're not going to use these. And I think most of the UFO sightings occurred right after the atomic bomb was set off. Not only just in Hiroshima, but just the tests in Nevada. That's supposedly where Roswell came about with a craft crash, because right outside of Roswell was actually the Air Force base that took the atomic weapons to Japan. That's where they were stored, and that's
right.
where the aircraft existed. So that's when they seemed to appear. And most sightings back in the 50s took place over nuclear facilities, both storage facilities where they kept nuclear weapons and also over nuclear power plants in more recent times. Mm-hmm. So something is going on around nuclear energy that these beings don't want us to use it. Because I think what it means is when we do a nuclear explosion, it may be affecting things on other dimensions that we don't even know about.
Right.
Because of the nature of the electromagnetic energy that comes off these things. So they're saying basically, no, you're off limits. Also, there's been a good indication that they met us on the moon and said, this is it. You're not going any further until you work out your problems with your hostility and your competitiveness and your ability to easily kill each other. You're not going into space.
And just kind of on that note, you were talking about the actual geomagnetic. Right. So the Bermuda Triangle, they say, I think there's about 4 areas on the Earth where there's some type of confluence, if you will, right. of geography, geomagnetism, and right. all of that. Of course, clearly, people will say, well, it's just, the weather, this, that. But that flight of those 5 right. Avengers, clearly, their compasses went off. They were experienced pilots.
Right.
So do you feel, Gary, that there are areas in the Earth that are more conducive to aliens, UFOs, because there's a geomagnetic or some type of a safe spot for them?
I think in a sense, I think any place is safe for them as far as their ability to deal with what the Earth is. But if you look at, if you go on Google and Google show an image of the electromagnetic forces from gravity around the Earth, it's amazing how there's so many different areas that are high intensity energy areas on the Earth itself. How this would affect them or how they use it, I don't know. Tesla had some very good ideas about how to use it as far as providing electricity to the whole world. And I think that...
Nikola Tesla, wanted to contact. Remember, he made the tower? He felt that there was...
he felt he could.
The father of AC electricity. Right, Nikola Tesla died, though, broke, in poverty, and crazy in New York.
Well, he did, but he was taking care of pigeons. The man was such an incredible genius. If there is such a thing as an avatar, he was an avatar because he was so far advanced. And so many people don't realize it, but almost everything we use today in electronic fashion,
right?
He invented
AC, yeah.
The first time, no, but he did radio.
Right.
Actually, Marconi had to give up his patent because Supreme Court said it was Tesla.
Yeah.
And also he invented remote control. So all the remote control stuff that we have is his stuff. So and he did even with different kinds of radiation. He worked with. He was just so far above everything else mm-hmm. that one has to say that it's a good possibility he was not of this Earth in a sense. But I think there's probably others like that as well. And there's good indication that whether it's genetics involved or there's actually been a hybrid kind of breeding between the aliens and humans, but there's a lot of indication with the last couple generations of young people that there's some profound differences in the way they think and the way their minds work. And unfortunately, it's in our culture, a lot of it's been pathologized so that these young people are thought to have some sort of mental disorder or some sort of hyperactivity, ADHD or something like that. And the real truth is they're just different. Their minds are different, and their minds function in a different fashion, and they're much more advanced, actually, than we are as far as their development is concerned. So, I mean, there's things happening that could be subtly part of the whole alien presence or the ET presence that are slowly drifting into our society to make changes. I mean, let's face it, we're in trouble. Some changes have to happen.
Are there, Gary, alien beings among us today?
Oh, I think so. Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah.
And and that would be even as sophisticated as a genetic DNA genome type of insertion.
Well, yeah, I think that's it. And there's also different species of the aliens. There's one group that are called the Nordics, who are very human looking. In fact, if they walk down the street, you would know it. They look like Norwegians. They have very blonde hair and fair skin, and they could easily mix with the society.
Right.
And it's if you look at the whole ET thing as very advanced civilizations actually studying the Earth, just like we study animals. What we do to monkeys and rodents and stuff in our laboratories, they're basically kind of doing the same thing with us. And there's a possibility that us is them, in the sense that maybe our origins are involved with them on some level. Maybe our existence is a combination of evolution and genetic manipulation by these other beings. And now they're getting more into the genome and in understanding genealogy. It's becoming very evident that there's things going on that we had no idea were going on in our DNA. Mm-hmm. And there's actually genes that are fused together that this does not happen in nature. The genes are fused together. They have to be fused by an outside source. Mm-hmm. And now there's this whole issue that just came out recently about genealogy being involved and changed by our own experience. Can be transferred over time from our ancestors to us through DNA. So this opens a whole broad area of what is possible. So it's very exciting. I think it's very exciting. And to me, it's hopeful. It's one of the few areas where I have hope,
You're listening to Open Book. I'm your host, Johnny Kusnow. We're talking to Gary Wheeler. I guess I could call you a ufologist.
Yeah, I guess you
Is that fair to say? That you are technically a ufologist?
Yeah, I guess you could.
I was waiting to use that, but I didn't know it was proper. The thing that gets me, kind of does get me. I know a lot of the Air Force reports, and this is going to go to the heart of this, I think. Okay, the laws of physics are supposed to be inviolable. I mean, physics, although you could make a case, Newtonian physics, Einstein, quantum physics, and so forth. But when you have pilots who are trained observers saying that these craft their maneuverability is incredible, extreme rates of climb, lack of noise. There's no noise, evasive behavior. The aerodynamics of it are incredible. And I'm wondering, okay, all of that taken, and you have some alien, for lack of a better word, what is that presence, the essence of that alien? What would you, I mean, again, I don't know if it sounds perfunctory, but what would the alien look like that could get in that craft or control that craft? Do you have any sense of what we're dealing with, or is that too far out of our...
No, it's all speculation. I mean, they certainly have the typical gray, as they call it, alien that most people have reported in their abductions being involved with, although many people feel that particular species is more of an android, almost like worker bees that come here and kind of make collections for the higher level beings that are probably on larger ships outside our dimension here. But many people, because of the nature of the kind of energy that can exist, believe that some forms of them are just energy. There is no physical presence whatsoever. A lot of people feel the orbs are just energy orbs that are actually beings themselves that are just pure energy. So it's really hard to get out of the box. Once you get out of the box of our thinking, you have to be very careful, because once you get out of the box, you lose parameters, which means you lose boundaries about how you perceive reality. So when you come out of the box, you want to just come out of the box a little bit and sort of look at things that people have been exposed to and sort of accept certain things, and don't go too far, because when you go too far, you get into areas that are all speculation, and then you get into all kinds of theories and all kinds of conspiracy stuff that can really cloud the issue. Because I know a lot of people who are interested in UFOs, they start looking at it on the internet and they just get lost, because there's just so much stuff that is basically on our level unbelievable. Not saying it is, but it seems that way. But if you follow those who are in the business and have been in the business for the last 50 years and studying this, and listen to what they have to say, and listen to the disclosure projects, both the one in 2000 and the recent one in May, are marvelous to listen to, because these are the people. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are the people that have been studying this.
Is there anything, Gary, in this conversation, and this is I'm going to extrapolate out a little bit, just because I have you here and I can. Okay, as far as knowable, there are some things, maybe, for instance, an atheist denies the existence of God. An agnostic says, I can't know God. I don't have the mental facilities. I accept 13.8 billion years the universe was formed. I'll accept that. I accept that the universe is expanding. But I guess my questions would be in parallel to the UFO thing. Okay, so the universe started 13.8 billion years ago. What happened before? What actually happened before? Or
see, that's a human question. I mean, that's how we think. That doesn't mean that that's a valid question. It's a valid question to us, because we think in those terms.
Right.
We think in time.
Well, time is illusory to me, isn't it?
Time could literally not exist except on the plane that we use it. So, I mean, the fact that the universe maybe just started yesterday and we're just part of it is as valid as to say it happened 20 million years ago. We just don't know, and the fact that now with, again, the quantum theories that are out there, it's very possible there are multiverses, and that there's all kinds of things going on all at the same time. And there's multiple Earths, and there's multiple yous, and multiple me's, and everything's a hologram, and so there's all kinds of stuff going on outside the box that is huge.
Right. Well, to that point, multiverse. Right. Okay, I accept that the universe is expanding. Actually, with dark matter, the universe is going faster, which they never felt it could do. But it's actually going faster, I think, due to dark matter. Okay, so where, in fact, Gary, does the universe end?
Well, I don't think that's a real question. Again, I mean, those are questions.
But the thing is, though, Gary, there is an answer. Well, I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to tie this into our understanding of the aliens and all of that. Isn't it, in fact, the box you speak of psychologically, aren't we boxing ourselves in?
Well, we're trying to, so we feel safe. I mean, answers are supposedly give us a sense of safety, but the reality is we're not safe. There's no such thing as really being safe. The best way to stay safe is to pay attention and to be in the here and now, and that'll get you the best you can. But the reality is, if I sit here or I go out and talk to people and I say, do you realize that where you're standing right now, you're moving 1,000 miles an hour? The Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and that means you're moving at 1,000 miles an hour. And most people would not understand that or even believe it. And then to go further and say, well, not only is that happening, but we're going around that star up there at 500,000 miles an hour. So we're not only going 1,000, we're going 500,000. And on top of that, the whole solar system is going around the galaxy at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And the galaxy is moving. I mean, it just goes on and on.
So. Well, I knew the conversation was going to end up here. I just didn't know if it was going to take 50 minutes. But again, and I appreciate what you're saying. But again, to go back to the point of consciousness, reality, what's real, what isn't, boundless space, quantum physics. Right. How can people listening need to understand that their mind may not have the facilities to get around what a UFO or an alien is?
Well, I think that's true.
And how do they broach that, Gary?
It's on whatever level they can. I mean, each individual has to basically come to some sort of decision about the possibility of this occurring, and with their own experiences. I mean, as I say, I've come across many people that have had experiences, and one resource they can go to is MUFON, which is MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network on the internet, and there they have all kinds of information, but they are the largest actually organization that studies UFOs, and they actually have investigators that go out. And if somebody has an experience, and they basically do forensic investigation.
Yes.
But also, you can go there and you can look at the map of the United States at any time, and you'll see all the different UFO sightings that have been reported around the United States every day. So and there's hundreds of them that are occurring all the time. So the individual is going to have to come to grips with his own belief system. Mm-hmm. Look how much problem we have right now with belief systems. I mean, causing people to kill each other, for God's sakes, over one kind of belief versus another. Hopefully, if the ETs actually come forward, it will be an opportunity to have that change, that possibly we can open up to a type of communication that goes beyond all that.
I guess, and I knew this hour would go faster than the speed of light, and I actually have my own theory that I have figured out there is something faster than the speed of light. That's a whole other show. Good. But I need to ask you, I would be remiss if I didn't. Have you ever in your life had a close encounter of the third kind?
Yes, I think I've had two, actually, but I didn't know I had them. And I'll say this about people's experiences in general. All of us, I think, have had experiences in our life that have occurred that we really have no answer to. They sort of stand out as what ufology calls high strangeness. They're things that occur that just really don't make sense to us. Some people interpret them in a religious sense. Some people call them epiphanies. And I had two such events occur, and I just sort of put them on a shelf for years. And then later on in life, I happened to read John Mack's book on abductions, and one of the patients he dealt with described his abduction, and it was exactly what happened to me. And he described the craft that he saw, and I had never heard a description of a craft that was exactly what I saw, and I was blown away when I read it. Then I immediately went on the internet and started looking at all the pictures of UFOs to see if I could find it. And I did. I found it. I found exactly what it looked like. And in that particular experience, I had never been so euphoric in my life. I mean, it was like the whole experience was ecstatic. And all that I remember that happened is my memory was uploaded. And it was uploaded in such a way that I could perceive everything that was being uploaded as my own experience and actually feel all the feelings involved. So, I mean, when I read that in John Mack's book, I had this question mark hanging over me with this experience. And I said, well, that makes as much sense as anything else. I mean, that's what happened.
Right.
And I had another experience when I was 20 years old, traveling around Florida in my van. I picked up a hitchhiker, which I never do. An old guy who looked kind of disheveled. He took me to a little shack where he lived, he said, and I went into the shack, which I would never do. And when I went in, the whole place was full of newspapers, floor to ceiling, and there was one table. And on that table was all these charts, and all these charts had all the different kinds of frequencies that are in common. Frequencies of music, frequencies of mathematics, frequencies of sound, frequencies of color, and he said, this is what it's all about. frequencies. And then I don't remember what happened.
After. Well, again, fascinating, Gary. I want to give you a few minutes.
Sure.
Could you tell if people who are listening or wanted to take a class or ask you questions or your website, could you share that with them?
Yeah, two ways to do it is I have a Facebook page that is totally devoted to nothing but UFOs and articles and videos about that. And the address for that is GW News 2, the number 2. And that's a Facebook page. And also there's an email address, the same as gwnews2@yahoo.com. If you have any concerns, you can reach me there. And I really encourage people, if you've had experiences, feel free to give me a call if you need to share them with somebody, because I have experience dealing with that, and your anonymity is guaranteed, and it might be good for you to have somebody to talk to.
Excellent. On that note, Gary Wheeler, UFO, friend, foe, or fantasy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yep.